Hi, I'm John Byrne with Poets&Quants, and I have with me today Jeremy Shinewald, the founder and CEO of mbaMission and a Darden MBA. Right?
Where you live today. You live in Charlottesville.
Exactly, and I love it.
Yeah.
It's a really wonderful place. So, wow, we're in interesting times, to say the very least. A lot of turmoil in the markets, a lot of concern about the new administration in the U.S., in particular among international students and international applicants, so we probably should start there. If you're an international student or someone who wants to come to the United States for business education, would you advise them to do it? Or would you say, stay away until Trump leaves office?
How much time do we have? We have 10, 15 hours to chat right now. It is such a complicated question, and it really depends so much on the individual, and it's changing moment by moment, right? So, admittedly, 3 weeks ago, we had applicants who had gotten into elite global schools, calling us saying, should I even accept my offer? And we also had applicants who had paid to work with us for the coming year saying, should I even be applying? And I admittedly, I just kind of said, there's no need for urgency in this decision making right now for either party, right? There was a lot going on. I mean, they were talking about canceling all student visas, across the country, and all Harvard student visas.
Deportations were making headlines.
Yeah, exactly.
For minor infractions.
Yeah, and I think those are still going on. Actually,
yes.
I oddly enough actually know someone who actually fled the country for concern of being deported for really nothing.
Wow.
Separate conversation, but so like there was real palpable fear that I think may have crested. I don't think it's gone away. Well, I don't think it's gone away entirely, but it may have crested. And so I would encourage. There's a lot can happen between now and a September deadline or a December deadline. I think just pragmatically, I would encourage anyone who's applying from around the world to basically, if you were interested in doing it before, to continue along that path and to continue to digest information as you go. I think one thing that we discovered during this process of trying to advise our applicants is that a lot of the schools were being quite flexible with applicants. They were saying, look, like, we don't want you. We're not officially offering deferrals to anyone, but we're willing to work with you on this. We're definitely willing to, if this is not a good decision for you right now, we're not going to be punitive about this. We're not going to keep your deposit. We're not going to, if you decide to go through and you can't get your visa, we're not going to keep your deposit. We will defer you if that happens. If you're trying to get here, there were just so many storylines developing so quickly, and then it seems that the administration has already beaten a fairly hasty retreat on that. Maybe a separate discussion, but it's, I think, largely
on many things.
Yes, but I think it's largely because a lot of the schools will be bankrupted, and not just. I don't mean MBA programs. I just mean that there's. I wish I could remember. I think international students contribute $48 billion to the economy, and they balance the books at tons of small colleges around the country.
Right. Yes.
And if they didn't get their visas, I'm not necessarily talking about Harvard Business School, which wouldn't disappear if the internationals didn't come. It'd be unfortunate. It would change the dialogue in the classroom.
True.
But they would live financially. Many small colleges around the country would fold up. So there's this whole piece of uncertainty which I feel like maybe, I don't know if I can say it's becoming certain, but it's becoming less. The fluctuations and gyrations are much lower than they were before, and I think people probably. I can't tell you what other people's risk profiles would be. I was an international applicant once myself.
Indeed.
I think if I were, and I tend to be quite risk averse, as you know, John, and I think I would probably, if I was intending on applying in the past, I would continue down that path. But one thing I would say is, and we were talking this before we went live, is sometimes using sort of a value investor paradigm, where a lot of value investors will say, look, you want to strike when the fear is the highest. it might be a great year for internationals to apply,
That's
as
true.
long as they feel like they can actually matriculate and graduate. And
Because you also have to
dreams.
assume a certain percentage of people will just be afraid,
Because a certain percentage
and that will lessen the competition for one thing.
the competition will
And
be lower.
the other thing are the facts. Look, as horrific as headlines show on the deportations, on the revocations of visas, we're talking about like a fraction of 1% of all the international students in the United States that have been affected by this. And even them, court decisions have ruled largely in favor of these students. And in many cases, as you pointed out, the administration has pulled back on enforcing a revocation or a deportation.
Yeah.
And when someone is deported, it's generally because they committed a crime. It can be a minor or inconsequential crime, like a DUI, but that's what it is.
Right. Well, but I think the larger fear was more about like, will they even issue these visas going
Yes.
forward, and will those will certain schools have the administration is targeting, will those schools have bigger problems than other schools?
Yeah, and we just ran a story on a Michigan Ross admit who was denied a visa. But to your point, your deposit will be returned. You probably can come later on if you want to come.
Yeah.
And all this stuff is going to work itself out. Here's the other thing, I think. When you're living abroad and you read these headlines, they're really scary. And you think that the entire environment in the United States has changed. Right. And the truth is, on every college campus, it's an incredibly welcoming environment where people of all kinds are embraced and accepted and connect with others, right?
Yeah, I mean, I talked to someone at Harvard Business School the other day who said, for all of the noise out there, and she wasn't discounting the noise, she wasn't being insensitive about it, but she was like, fundamentally, the student experience is going to be the same, basically. I mean, someone might have some, justifiable anxiety in the back of their head, but basically, the situation day to day in the classroom would be the same for an international as it would be in the past.
Right.
But let me ask you this: I know there is some data. I don't know if you have it off top of your mind, but I mean, there definitely is data, and I heard this from GMAC, which administers the GMAT, that that applications for internationals or test takers internationally definitely fell during the first Trump administration, at least for the first 2 years,
Yep.
if not more. And I don't know if you have any numbers off the top of your head. I can't remember what they were, but it would support. I know it's a fact that it happened. I can't quantify it off the top of my head, but I think that supports both parts of the thesis, which is some people are scared and they're looking elsewhere. And I remember the European programs felt like there was a surge, and I think even the Canadian programs felt
Yes,
like there was
that's
a bit of a
right.
surge.
There was.
But also, it's those who were a little more stealth, or
Yeah.
a little bit more daring, shall I say,
Yeah.
definitely had a little bit more opportunity out there to get into a program that maybe
That's
they
true.
wouldn't have got into before.
And some of those stats are kind of funky because of the pandemic later on. So you can't completely attribute the Trump administration to all of the decline.
Right.
It was really exacerbated by the pandemic.
Yeah. But I don't think it's just international. I think as we consider who's applying today, there's a ton of uncertainty out there, even because of tariffs. Like I talked to a lot of people who are involved in private equity. I was talking to a fellow the other day, and he said deals are getting done in like very specific niches, like business services was one. He's like, look, people are going to need accountants no matter what. People are still rolling up accounting firms that's somewhat immune to tariffs.
Right.
He's like, they're not getting done in consumer goods because consumer goods, a ton of them have international supply chains. And so, there are, like, yes, today I think the Dow shot up like 900 points or something like that. And people felt some relief in terms of the tariffs coming down from both sides. China,
Yeah, the truce.
To 30%.
Yeah.
I mean, still enough to be deeply disruptive to the economy, but
that's right.
less than, what was 100, what was the peak, 145?
Yeah, it was insane.
And yeah, insane. And that was a shock to the economy. But I think I'm surprised at the overall market, and I think there might be another opportunity there for people who are in the financial world, in the consulting world, to get ahead this year instead of next year. Now, I'm granted I'm not an economist, and this is just my own personal gut feeling about where the economy is.
Right.
But I don't see the economy quickly sorting through tariffs the way the market is responding. And I think if you're applying now as a domestic applicant, you could be applying into a much better year this year than next year.
Right, and graduating in a much better environment, probably.
Potentially, yeah.
And after all, MBA applications are often, they're almost always counter-cyclical, right? So when hard times come, people want to escape to graduate school because the opportunities where they are diminish.
Right. So if you agree with my thesis,
Yeah.
and you think that people will be sort of in a holding pattern, waiting and seeing this year and saying, I don't know, wait for the other shoe to drop. Like, why would I leave my stable job right now, and go back to business school now? I believe that the economy is going to be weaker next year, and that I don't think it's going to be quite like COVID, but I think that there will be pain in the economy.
Absolutely.
And I think people will go back to school then.
Yeah.
And even if you get instead of COVID, where you got this sort of massive wave of applications, part of it was facilitated by GMAT test GMAT test waivers at that time. But still, even if it's just the pool is 10% higher, that's still a lot. 10% higher at Harvard Business School is an entire class worth of students.
Right.
In terms of the applications, it's a lot. Now,
And apps were up last year, significantly, actually.
they were up last year, but in fairness, they're up off of a low. They're
Yes,
back
true
into a normal
enough.
rate. They're back into a normal rate.
Now, I think when the numbers come out, they'll be up again. And at some schools, the big boom has been international applicants,
Right.
even this last cycle.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of those applicants prepared their documents before the Trump inaugural.
Right. Yeah. So you're right. I think that from my conversations with admissions officers, there was a big jump off of a localized low after, not even after COVID. COVID, there's a big boom, and then it kind of fell off as a lot of young people felt like there was job security, and
Right.
everything was fine. And then we're almost like economic historians here, John. Like the you had some of the tech layoffs come, jobs became less certain. People were ordered back to the office, which they did not like. Like, I'd rather go back to school than go back to the office. All sorts of changes, and applications came back up. Harvard. So for those who don't know, Harvard Business School typically gets 9,500 applicants a year, and it was down to as low as 8,200. I've been doing this for 20. This will be my 22nd year. I think my 21st year, 22nd cycle. I've never seen anything without a 9.
Yeah, that's kind of remarkable.
82 was very low. Like, people in that year.
And the peak is well over 10.
Yeah, it's a little over 10. Yeah, and that doesn't include also I don't believe that includes the 2+2s. I don't think they're counted in the numbers. So, I think it can quickly become more competitive, and it has. I would guess the year of the application season we're coming into will be less competitive, because I do believe that some of the international applicants are already frightened to apply, but we'll see.
Now, the other administration-related issue is DEI.
Right.
The Trump administration is seemingly wanting to stamp out all diversity, equity, and inclusion programs at every university. Of course, they can do that at public universities with very little trouble.
Yeah.
It's a little harder at private universities, but with the threat of withdrawing federal funds and research grants, you can exert a lot of influence on a school to eliminate a DEI program.
Right.
How does this impact, do you think, the application season?
Well, I can tell you very practically, it impacts the admissions office immediately. I talked to an admissions officer at Top 50 in school the other day, and she said that she doesn't know what her application is going to look like these days, because lawyers are going through every word of her application before she's going to release it. And that's like, think about that. I mean, think about that as your job as an admissions officer is now managing a legal team to make sure that you're not crossing.
It's really complicated.
Yeah,
In some cases, you can't even indicate gender on an application form,
Yeah, yeah. So,
which is like, come on. I mean, really?
yeah,
How silly.
yeah. So you've got this world where, certainly, well, this is the same world that's been going on for what, two seasons in now, where you cannot ask someone about their gender, or you can't ask someone about their ethnic, racial profile. But the schools are, and maybe they'll be less encouraging of this going forward publicly, but they've given people ways to talk about their background, to talk about.
That's right.
When there's a diversity essay. I think the odds of anyone calling it a diversity essay going forward are zero. I mean, I think they might call it a personal background essay or something like that. But the schools have been, have been basically saying like, well, tell us about your walk through life, and if you're able to say that your walk through life has been informed by your immigrant story from Guatemala, and that your parents moved here and you were born here. You're obviously signaling to them that you represent diversity. An interesting way that the schools are doing this also is by talking about like first-gen applicants, and so
Right.
And that might be a remarkably fair way.
And I think that's a really good way to do it, frankly. Yeah. And to your point, I mean, because business school admissions are quote unquote holistic, there's a lot of attributes that a applicant surrenders in that process, where yes, it's more difficult for an admissions officer right off the top of the application, but once you read the app, you know what you're getting.
Yeah, I mean, like if someone has been, if someone has been, involved with the Black Business Students Association in undergrad,
Right.
and continues mentoring, in that organization going forward, and like it's possible that person might not be Black, but the odds are you're going to be saying like, I'm able to put together some of the pieces here and understand who this person is. I don't know how. If the government really wanted to be involved in that, I don't know how they could ask you not to disclose your club memberships in college.
Right.
So at some level, some applicants are going to be able to inform the admissions committee of their walk through life. The admissions committee still can't technically say like we're factoring this into our decision making, but you also can't totally set up a wall in your brain and wall off that information either. So
it's not the end of diversity on business school campuses.
It's not, but like I was pretty shocked at the numbers this year. Do you know what the numbers at Northwestern were?
No.
They were. I looked at. I might be getting these wrong. I believe that they were. I apologize, Northwestern, for getting this wrong, and please do check their class profile. I believe they had under 5% African American and Latino populations, and I believe that was double at virtually every other M7 program.
Wow.
Double or more. I think it was about 12% on average. I think they were a little under 6. So they may have had, they may have just been not looking the way other schools were. They may have constructed their application differently. They may have had a different pipeline. But there are lots of schools out there that have seen a drop off in the diversity in their class at all levels, in undergrad and in graduate school, et cetera.
And one of the other problems is scholarship aid.
Yes.
And in some ways, I think that's even a bigger problem, because if you take the view that business school admissions are holistic and they can basically tell who you are, on the other hand, they can't award you money in discounted tuition based on gender or ethnicity.
Right.
So that becomes more problematic, because we know one of the things that business schools have been doing to get closer to gender parity is pushing a disproportionate share of the scholarship money to female candidates.
Right.
And you got to wonder what's going to happen with that.
And there I should be fair to Northwestern, which had 50% of its class was women.
Yeah.
Duke, Fuqua was at 51%.
Yeah.
Wharton was very close to 50. They've been at 50 before.
Right.
And I think that's the phenomenon you're thinking of. I think.
And this has been cause for a big celebration, because for years, Forte, which promotes females in business education, has been trying really hard to increase this number. There was a point where they almost gave up, frankly, where they said, okay, we can't get it above a third. Mm-hmm. And then since then, Wharton was a breakthrough school, and then other schools have followed. And you wonder, could there be a fallback as a result of all this DEI
Right.
stuff.
Well, I think also like it's there's such enormous cuts in the Department of Education
Yes.
that have happened, and so if you've got the Department of Education top down cutting institutions, they're trying to find savings everywhere. So we invited a director of admissions to podcast with us, and this director of admissions committed to it, and then contacted us and said, I really apologize, but my school has cut funding for all travel right now, and I can't come anymore. Like, that's how micro it got that quickly. And I've got a very close friend of mine who's a professor, who's a tenured professor at a top business school, and they told him that basically I don't know how they can do this, but they're cutting salaries and increasing teaching workloads as opposed to hiring, I guess, sessionals or new academics, whatever it is.
Wow.
So like there is a real
Yeah.
effect of that cut in funding in the Department of Education,
Yeah.
and that's going to trickle down to scholarships. So you might start to see schools that are haves and have-nots in terms of what they can do with scholarships. And any school that hasn't had a massive endowment campaign in the last little while, it'd be an interesting story to look at, where each school's endowment is and when they've done their last campaign, because if you don't have some money sitting on the books right now, you're probably going to lose students to other schools, because the number one thing that students look at, you can tell them until you're blue in the face, this is the wrong program for you, or maybe you should consider these other factors. They care about rankings, and that's just perceived rankings, not actual rankings.
Yes.
But perceived rankings and scholarships, and that's it. And so, if the scholarship money isn't there for one school, if school X doesn't have it, but school Y does, school Y will get the applicant from now on, and that's going to be very painful to any school that doesn't have any powder dry waiting for to give out in scholarship money. So you probably know what the haves and have-nots are these days. There could be a bit of a shake-up in terms of who gets which applicants.
Oh yeah. I mean, there are schools that have histories of being incredibly generous, and Harvard is at the top of the list.
Yeah.
They have so much money, it's insane. But there are a lot of other schools that are true laggards in scholarship support. Mm-hmm. And you got to know that they're struggling to get the best students. They're not struggling to get students, but to get the very best students.
Yeah, I mean, I would do the MBA tour with some admissions directors sometimes, and I'm not going to name names or name schools, but every once in a while they'd be grumbling like, I don't know how that school raises all that money. Like, I can't keep up with them. And it's all about scholarship money these days, and we can't keep up with them. And that gap is going to become bigger. And there might be, if it goes on if the defunding of the Department of Education goes on for a long period of time, maybe, I'm not too optimistic about this. I think the brands are just so entrenched, but maybe over time, you actually start to see a real shakeup in the desirability of certain schools. If one school just continues to just attract all the top applicants with a lot of money.
Yeah.
So the other part of the Department of Education, or about the defunding of the government, is that a lot of the consulting firms there are several, like Deloitte in particular, Booz Allen in particular, Accenture, major government contracts.
Yes.
And so like major government contracts that have been canceled, like billions of dollars in government contracts that are canceled. And so where there are cancellations of massive contracts, there are layoffs. And I read something the other day about Deloitte telling its partners next year there won't be bonuses because of I don't know if that's true, but I believe that to be true. I believe I read that in the journal. If it's going to flow through that quickly, the consulting firms, there will be layoffs. And that again, like even if you've got a couple $1 billion, think about how many analysts service a couple of $1 billion. And if you lay them off, sure, not all of them go back to business school right away, but even if a few hundred of them go back to business school with time, it certainly starts to make the consulting pool even more competitive.
That's true.
And if you do that across several firms, and I don't know, the ones that are named are often not the MBBs, but MBB must have some exposure.
Oh, sure they do. Not a lot, but they do.
Yeah. So, it starts to flow through.
Now, you mentioned the word there. I want to come back on you with rankings.
Ooh.
Okay. We're obsessed by them. I am not. The applicant pool is obsessed by them, is what I really mean. you know, and we cover rankings extensively, and I have to say, you know, by and large, they get the most hits. That's what people want to read. Do they matter?
I mean, it's such an oversimplification. It is. It is like I've used this rhetorical point for a long time, right? I don't know off the top of my head, but for the longest time, for a couple of years in a row, Iceland was considered to be the #1 place in the world to live by the United Nations. They would do their
Happiness index?
it wasn't the happiness index, really. It was like their their health and wellness index, for lack of
yeah.
better. But you know, like no one was getting up and just moving to Iceland. Like no one was like, okay, they're #1 this year, move to Iceland. If they fall to #2, I'm going to move to Norway. Then I'll move to Canada. Right? Like because it was an oversimplification. I mean, it was. I'm sure there was some relevant. I'm sure it's a wonderful place to live and people have long lifespans. But like. It was the decimal point in difference between Iceland and Canada, which tended to jockey back and forth. Was it really that meaningful to people? You know, that where they would be like, okay, one is dramatically better to live in than the other, and would you make your decision based on that? Maybe you're young and you're not worried about longevity right now. Maybe you're more worried about where there's a good jazz club. Maybe that's where you want to live. Maybe you want to live in Chicago or Kansas City or whatever it is. So this is a very, very long, drawn-out analogy. But my point is that the rankings obsession, it is like to make a lifetime decision on the basis of, a few decimal points that you don't even look at in the U.S. News survey or the Business Week survey. You know, it doesn't make any sense. And so. And the other thing about it is, and we will talk about this in greater. I've got so much to say on this one. Cancel your 2 o'clock, whatever time it is in your time zone. But like, I mean, there's.
But you know, you work with candidates. I'm sure you've heard them say, "Hey, I got accepted into #5, #7, and #11. 11's giving me full scholarship. 7's giving me partial. My best school is giving me nothing. What should I do?"
Yeah, I mean,
right.
Yes, I think that will hear, but I think and then you just have to work it through with each individual to figure out what's most important to them. You know, like we've got a member of our team, Melissa Merchant. She was accepted to Stanford, Harvard, and Kellogg with a full scholarship. And to her, she was like, I'd rather go with the full scholarship with Kellogg, and took the money and graduated from Kellogg debt free. And that to her was really important. She's actually probably the rarity. But like she did that, and I've always admired her for that. Yeah. Most people these days will say the money doesn't matter unless it's between, you know, 2 evenly ranked, you know, schools. But there's so much more there, because you're buying yesterday, not the future. Where is it going to be in the future? But the other piece that I find to be very interesting, we've talked about this before, and we'll talk about it again, is that. Any deviation in rankings is considered to be nonsense. So that if you say, oh well, according to our rankings, Cornell is now #1, and you'd be like, well, that doesn't matter. Harvard and Stanford are #1. So why are you even ranking? Like what's the point if you're going to discount any jump in rankings as noise and nonsense?
Yeah.
It really doesn't make sense. It's like, why don't we just ossify the rankings at Harvard and Stanford #1 and #2, Wharton #3, like because that's all people will accept anyway. So the whole process of ranking becomes absurd because people have a preconceived notion of what the ranking should be. They're not open to any knowledge. How long would it take for a school to be ranked #1 in Business Week before it might shake up the perceived orthodoxy in rankings? Like, would it be if Michigan were #1 for 8 years, 10 years? Would people start saying like, all right, I'll go to Michigan instead of Northwestern? Would start to shift them? I don't know, you know. But right now, Darden I think is ahead of Harvard in Business Week. I think it's like, yeah, I went Darden's a wonderful school. I don't think anyone's saying Darden's #6, Harvard's #7 in Business Week. I'm choosing Harvard right now.
Right.
So, you know, I think there's something obviously very broken in this whole ranking system.
Is there a metric that's more important that may not be measured by a ranking?
I mean, a single metric, I don't know.
I think it's yield.
Yeah, yield. Yeah,
I mean, that's the wisdom of the crowd, and not only the crowd, but an informed crowd of applicants.
Except that yield is contingent on these ossified standings of these schools, you know, like in many ways. but it still might be fair in the short term.
Yeah, I mean, and we know from Yale it's Harvard and Stanford,
Yeah.
like way up, and then it's
Right.
a drop.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, it's probably a decent metric.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I just think like.
And I should define yield because maybe some people don't know.
Sure.
It's the percentage of applicants admitted who actually attend and enroll in this program. So basically, you get an invite and you reject it. That tells me something about the school.
The problem with that ranking is the problem that's going on with college right now, which is schools are rewarded for rejecting people.
Yes.
They are rewarded for getting the largest pool possible that they can reject, and then you get people starting to play games. They say, "Oh, I'll lower the cost. I'll lower the cost of our application. I'll make it free to a huge constituency." I mean, look, there's always some way to
Manipulate it.
Manipulate it at some level. There are people going to jail for it, as you've documented before, or have been. Where was the fellow who went to jail?
Well,
Or he's appealing.
he's appealing to the Supreme Court,
Yeah.
and he's still out of jail.
Yeah.
But he was sentenced to go to jail for
Yeah.
essentially
Fraud.
providing fraudulent numbers to U.S. News, so his online MBA would rank #1 when it was nowhere near the top 20 or 30 even.
Yeah, I gotta tell you, John. I mean, prison is not high on my list of places to go, and there's no incentive that would give me, if you could give me, to try and falsify information, to take that kind of risk. I don't know what that guy. I mean, he must have just not understood the risk, or I mean, it's his job to understand the risks. But like, yeah, I mean, like the rankings piece these days, as we're talking about the future, is massive for people. And when I started in this business 21 years ago, you know, there were a broader number of schools in the mix. There was less of this really intense focus on brand. And like, yes, Harvard and Stanford were at the top, but actually Wharton was kind of at the top right there. It was like,
Yeah,
Harvard,
Wharton has
Stanford,
done very well in these rankings.
Yeah, but like I think these days it's more and more from like top private equity applicants, top consultants.
Right.
Harvard, Stanford, maybe Wharton. At the beginning it was like Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, and you know, I think at the beginning it was like Harvard, Stanford, Wharton. It was like, you know, some people were like, oh, you know, Columbia, or you know, whatever it is. Like, and other people who were just like, yeah, I just want a great business education. I'm excited to go to, you know, like these schools still get tons and tons of applications, but you know, I think from an elite applicant, they might have had like 5, 6, 7 schools on their list. Now they might have 2.
Yeah.
And you know, you still have lots and lots of people who are very happy to go to because they're awesome schools to go to
Absolutely.
a Michigan or a Berkeley or a Yale or a Darden or a Duke but you know, there's this really intense focus on brand these days.
I think, you know, look, if you're earning a lot of money already, and you've already had a fair degree of success, your expectations go higher immediately.
Yeah.
Because you're just making the calculation. I'm going to give up 150, 200K in pay every year to go to business school, and lose 2 years of income, and then what kind of job am I going to get? You kind of need to go to Harvard or Stanford to make it work.
And the tuition's gone up significantly.
Absolutely.
And that's going to have to end right now with the
That's true.
With the decline in scholarship funding that I'm anticipating. I can't see how you're going to make that argument for people if you're like, a lot of you are going to have to give up your salary, and you're going to have to pay 80 grand a year to, you know, and without living expenses,
Right.
to come to our school, and you know, there are lots of people paying that right now, and there's lots of value beyond the immediate financial, you know, beyond the immediate financial cost. There's value in taking 2 years off, learning, thinking about your MBA as a long-term phenomenon, and maybe that ties in with where we are. Like I think if we're talking about the MBA in this application cycle, one of the things that our applicants and even my peers that I went to business school with talk about, you know, is the long-term value of the MBA. They're like, yeah, I thought it was all about getting the first job, but I was in my job for like, I think the average is under a year for most MBAs, and I thought it was all about that first job, but it's really long-term. I still sort of exercise some of those muscles now, and I don't do it in a way that is like, you know, figuring out some Black-Scholes model spreadsheet something. It's like, I think about like the type of environment I want to cultivate in my office. I think about the type of strategy I want to have as a business person. Like, people talk all the time about the higher level sort of macro skills that an MBA gives them. And I think that there's a really narrow focus on ranking, first job, as opposed to like long-term value. Maybe like a stock market analogy where there's a focus on quarterly earnings as opposed to building a great company.
Yeah, I mean, we've paid for a firm to do analysis on the lifetime earnings of MBAs, and the stats are fascinating. You know, I mean, in terms of the millions of dollars MBAs make, and you don't have to go to Harvard and Stanford to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
You really don't.
Yeah.
I think any top 10 school gets you over 5 million, and those are numbers that are already 4 or 5 years old.
Yeah, and then there's also like the ROI calculation on some schools that just have lower tuition. Like
Right.
a school like BYU has a
Yes.
huge ROI, and I haven't checked that recently, but I believe
No,
the last time I checked,
that's
huge
right.
ROI, right?
They always do.
Yeah, lower tuition, and people graduate with less debt, and they tend to make ballpark around the same amount of money
Yeah.
as top 15 programs. Maybe a little bit less, but not enough to justify the loans at some schools.
So, Jeremy, do you use AI?
I use AI a little bit. I'm admittedly a bit of a late adopter to things, and so I think I was probably the last person to have a cell phone, and then I got the one that looked like a small toaster oven that my friends would make fun of. So I'm not a huge user of AI, but I'm it's becoming a little bit more part of my life. For sure.
So, how do you think it's going to impact jobs that MBAs get?
That's interesting. I think there are a couple of things that so just 'cause I don't use AI doesn't mean I don't think about it.
Right.
So I think that's a great question. I think that it's going to impact the MBA. Well, first of all, I think eventually there'll be almost like a Web 1.0 gold rush for MBA talent. So I think that you'll start seeing the ChatGPTs or whatever other brands like that coming to campus and scooping up MBAs eventually, and that might lead to a bit of a rush towards the MBA as it did with other ways.
Right, with Google and Facebook and Apple and Microsoft.
And then MBAs tend to follow the herd with jobs, right? So they believe that they're like doing something like sort of pious or different. Like so you saw that with the financial crisis, where right before that you had all these people contorting themselves to say like, I'm going to business school, I'm a speechwriter. I think I just pressed the mic. Sorry guys. I'm a speechwriter. I'm going to business school because I want to go. I've got some knowledge of the Middle East, and I want to go and like use leverage finance to fund programs. It's like it might make sense on paper, it doesn't make sense in reality, and like you're trying to get in on the gold rush. And I think you're going to start seeing that now soon with AI, and as people start saying like, I'm an AI person even though they're not, or they've used.
And then even beyond the AI companies, you have companies that are struggling to understand how do they deploy AI effectively for smarter decision making, for strategy, for marketing, and to the extent that schools have really gone all out to figure out how to teach this and teach it smartly and embed it throughout the curriculum. I think you're going to see a bunch of companies that are going to be hiring MBAs because they perceive those students will have the skills to teach them how to effectively use AI.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to start seeing the word AI a lot in the marketing of all programs. Like Kellogg has its MBAI, and like every school is kind of coming out with their. And I did a video on YouTube last year basically predicting this. So I definitely see that happening. But I think one aspect of that will probably become increasingly relevant, and I'm noticing this already in the college world, is that the ability to vet applicants will become much more significant. So like your first interview with a major bank might just be you and a video platform. Yeah. And like they're just going to be doing a lot of broad like availability and culling of individuals and just sort of getting to the point where they can say like, okay, we might throw the baby with the bathwater once or twice, but we are is that a totally Canadian phrase? Have you ever heard that before?
Sure.
Okay. Me being Canadian, every once in a while I use an idiom that doesn't work still after 25 years of living in the States. But like I think the other piece is that I think they're going to have much bigger funnels, and They're going to cull people or cull applicants with those funnels, and then get to like the more narrow subset of applicants that they're really interested in.
Right.
And so I think that the competition will become much more. Like I have a good friend of mine whose son is at a non-core school for banks, and he just went online and did his first interview, and the school didn't bother traveling there. They did no marketing there, but it was available to him. He did it online. There was no other human being on the other side, and I think he moved on to round 2. I got to check in with him.
Oh wow!
But like, that sort of is oddly enough at odds with brand, right? Like that's directly at odds with brand.
But the great fear about AI is going to basically kill a lot of jobs. Do you think it's going to impact the availability or the access to MBA jobs? In other words, can a bot do an MBA's job? Will that happen?
Well, again, I spent a lot of time talking to people in the industry, and I was talking to someone who's pretty senior at a global hedge fund the other day, and I asked him that question. I basically said, like, what is your need for analysts at this point? And they're a quant fund, and so they do a lot of analysts do a lot of I believe creating the programming that identifies the thesis. Like it's not like we're just like you need to have some computer like some coding experience,
right? Not
just have like your ability to run a DCF or whatever. And he said to me, and he's a pretty crusty guy, and so this was interesting to me because I thought I wasn't expecting this answer from him, and he said to me that the people that will be the most valuable are the people who have all the soft skills. Like I thought he would completely poo-poo soft skills, and he said the people who can exercise judgment, the people who can creatively define a thesis, and then he said basically with time, everyone at our hedge fund moves up into some sort of customer relationship or sales mode. He's like, it's effectively at my level, it's effectively sales.
Right.
And he said, like, we need people who can interact, who can talk, who can reason, who can create faith with other people.
Right.
And those are all the things that AI can't do.
Yeah.
And so
I actually think AI is going to have more impact on business undergrads because those jobs are more basic. They're more number crunching jobs. These are the analyst jobs that I think AI is going to alter dramatically. And that's going to have a big impact on business education overall. Okay, last thing, we're running out of time.
Yeah.
Are you a bull or are you a bear on the MBA in its future? There's been a lot of talk about the death of the MBA. Well, it's continual, let's face it. There are any number of naysayers who pop up from now and then. But it is true that, enrollments in a lot of schools have declined. Some schools have abandoned the marketplace. Yeah, there's so many more options, including online MBAs and all the specialty master's degrees. Right. But are you essentially a bull or a bear on the MBA?
So I've read all the stories about the MBA, the death of the MBA, and it reminds me of do you know how many stories have been written on the death of New York? Like every 10 years, the financial crisis, or when New York almost went bankrupt, or so many times there have been COVID, people were moving out of New York.
That's right.
Do you know how many New York is back stories I've read?
Yeah.
So I think of the same thing. Whenever I read a story about New York, I think about the MBA. And I'm not here to advocate for the MBA. I'm here to call balls and strikes. My feeling really is that I think there's a world where maybe some of the, as we talk about rankings, maybe some of the schools that we're that we're less familiar with, the value proposition gets a little bit lower with time, or maybe they start to go away with time. I don't see Harvard Business School going out of style. No. I don't see there not being 1,000 people out there every year who they're struggling to find 1,000 people who want to go to Harvard Business School. I think like everything, adapt, change. Education will be very different in 10 years, I would guess. People don't have the attention spans they used to have. Different people are coming in with different skills.
So you're a bull.
But I'm not a bull. But I don't.
You're trying to take a neutral position?
No, it's not that I'm trying to be neutral. It's that I don't believe the MBA is going away. I don't see it necessarily roaring. I see it pretty
steady.
Yeah, pretty static for the top, 15 programs. I maybe top 20 programs. However you define the top 20.
Right.
I don't think I personally don't think that, yes, on individual cases, there are people who make a mistake by going to a top school, like they could have done something different. It might not. It's rare. I very rarely get anyone calling me. I'm in touch with a lot of people, as we talked about today, saying, I shouldn't have done it, it was a waste of my time. Like, I can think of like 2 calls I've gotten like that in my life. One from someone who went to Stanford, and one from someone who went to the University of Toronto Rotman. So it gives you a sense of that.
Wow.
Okay. Other than that, I've gotten lots of calls from people like, the payoff is there, I'm happy with it. Now, that might be some confirmation bias, but I don't see en masse, the extinction of the MBA. I see it being probably plodding along pretty similarly through time.
Yeah, I think there's no question. It's an incredibly valuable degree. People who get it, the surveys have found year after year, are highly satisfied with the education they received. And it's more than the education and skills, it's the networking, which provides protection and support throughout your entire career.
Yeah.
But Jeremy, we ran out of time. I can't believe it. We can go on for hours on this, really.
That's what it's like to talk with an old friend. We can talk about this forever. I mean, we might. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, we
Thanks
hope
for
you
doing
enjoyed our conversation. This is John Byrne with Jeremy Shinewald at MBA Mission. Thanks for watching.